Hi everyone, welcome to the Communication and Conflict YouTube channel promoting mindful communication and growth through conflict. And this is also a podcast on chaos by the name of Chaos, C-A-O-S, which can be found on Apple and Anchor and Spotify and various other podcast platforms. So today, what I want to talk about is the issue of agreement and disagreement. And what I want to talk about is that it doesn't matter if we don't agree, but what does matter is how we disagree. As most of you will know, I work in the fields of mediation and conflict coaching, which is all about conflict resolution, supporting people in resolving the conflicts that they experience. And one of the things that I come across quite a lot is the idea that conflict can only be resolved through agreement and reaching agreement, and that everybody needs to sit down and compromise and come to agreement. And I think it's one of the reasons why when some mediators describe mediation as a process for bringing people to agreement, it puts a lot of people off the idea of having mediation, because they can be quite clear they really do not want to, nor do they ever see it as being likely that they will agree with another person or another set of people. And so immediately it's like, what would I do that for? And what I always try to emphasize is that mediation is about resolving conflict, and that is whatever the people involved decide is what is best for them. And that doesn't have to mean agreement. It can be simply acknowledging the ways in which they are disagreeing and how those are the things which are proving stressful and destructive and damaging and difficult for them. It's not that they don't agree over the issue, it's how they're then treating each other because of their disagreement. And you may have seen in some other videos that I've done about what I call the competitive approach to conflict, where people believe they have to win, they have to be seen as right and the other person as wrong, without acknowledging that they can be right from their perspective, but the other person can also be right from their perspective. And the difficulty is that they don't match. They've got different perspectives on things. It's like they're both looking in on a particular situation, but they see it from a different perspective, and this person's view of it is different to this person's view of it. So neither is right, they're just right from their own perspective. And what can sometimes happen is that we get involved in trying to make the person see things our way, and then expecting them to agree with us. And this is where the destruction occurs, because then what can sometimes happen is we start calling the person names, we say there's something wrong with them, we don't acknowledge that their perspective is valid, we say that there's some kind of malicious intent for saying the things they say, and that really if only they were intelligent enough they'd see our point of view was right. And these kinds of personal destructive kind of responses happen. And it's very much the kind of thing that you can see constantly on Twitter, as an example. It's just people kind of demonizing people who have different views to them, rather than in a sense engaging in a discussion with them about what it is they see and why they see it that way, and not making it a personal issue. You see it that way because you're a whatever. No, you see it because you want this, and you're just and it just gets into silliness, which doesn't go anywhere. And sometimes it's as if people feel they have to have the agreement of the other person before they can move on with the thing that they both presently see differently. It's as if people can feel quite threatened by the fact that there's another perspective, and they need that person to agree with them before they can move on, rather than accept that the other person has a different perspective, a different view of whatever that situation is, whether it's a family issue, a workplace issue, a community issue, a political issue, rather than accept that somebody can have a different view, but that doesn't stop me from pursuing what I want based on my view of a situation. If I say that that other person has to agree with me before I can move forward, I'm making myself dependent on them agreeing, and they may never want to agree, so I could wait forever for that to happen, and therefore, while I'm saying it's about their disagreement, it's actually me making myself dependent on them agreeing with me before I can move forward. And this is often what happens, is that I say people can, we can, I can do it myself. Any of us can become obsessed with the other person having to agree with us, and then if they don't, we start calling them names, we become abusive towards them, either on a low level or a high level, or we even become violent towards them because they don't agree with us, when actually all that energy could be focused on, okay, this person doesn't see things the same way as me. What is it that presently causes as an issue for me, and how can I go round that and still pursue what I want to do, even though we disagree? And the other person is just as much able to do the same. So they don't have to rely on us agreeing with them before we move forward. Now, obviously some people might be saying, well, you do have to agree on certain things. And yeah, if, say, I'm going into business with someone, or I've got some kind of commercial deal with someone, we will both have to agree on what we want to put into the contract, etc. If I'm going for a job, I have to agree to the job description, etc. But those are the things where we both want to have the same view of things. But where we don't have the same view of things, we don't need to, or we want the other person to have our view and they want us to have their view, but we're not moving anywhere on it. At some point we have to say to ourselves, what can I do that means I'm supporting myself in moving forward without depending on that other person seeing things the same way as me? But as I say, the difficulty does arise where, for whatever reason, we can become so kind of dependent on and therefore obsessed by the idea that other people have to agree with our point of view before we can move forward ourselves, that actually we become very frightened, because if we think, oh, I can't move forward on this because this person doesn't agree with me, it's actually our own fears that we're causing within ourselves, and our own kind of obstructions we're causing within ourselves, because we're saying, I have to have this person's agreement, or perhaps approval might be sometimes another way of saying it, before I can move on. And that's obviously not true. But if we haven't questioned whether we need that person's agreement, we can become very stuck and very frightened and very angry, and say, this person has to agree with me, when of course they don't. So how we disagree is really significant. In a lot of mediations, particularly workplace disputes, but any kind of dispute that I work in, neighbour disputes, family disputes, when people sit down with each other, if they do come together for a joint meeting, when they sit down with each other and have a long discussion focused on trying to move forward, it's very often the case they don't come to agreement about anything, but what they do come to realise is that actually the actions that the other person has been taking, or that they have both been taking, have not been as maliciously intended as they perhaps imagined. So they might have imagined that the actions of the other person were designed to stop them doing what they want to do because they didn't agree with what they're doing. Or they may have felt that the other person was deliberately trying to stop them from moving on with things because of kind of malicious reasons, when actually either that idea didn't even enter their head, or they would have no reason for doing that. In various kind of situations, I can think of neighbour disputes, for example, where people have had perceptions of why their neighbour was doing something, which would be they're doing it for some reason to upset me, whatever that thing might be. But when they actually come together to talk about it, they realise that the person had an entirely valid reason for doing what they did, and it wasn't intended to try to stop someone from doing what they want to do. Now, there's no agreement needed over that. It's just a different understanding of each other. They've just come to a different understanding of each other. And sometimes even in situations where we don't get a chance to engage with the other person, things may have become so bad we're not even seeing the other person. When we do conflict coaching with people, what that can sometimes do is help people to think, well, whether the other person agrees with us or not, or with you or not in your situation, what might still mean you can move forward in your situation anyway. And often people have just not considered that. They've become so obsessed with that this other person is an obstacle to them and won't agree with them and won't let them do this, won't let them do that, but that often they stop and think, well, even though we don't agree, actually that doesn't stop me from doing what I want to do. It's incredibly interesting to me how often that happens, that people think that that the need for someone else to agree with what they want to do is crucial to them being able to do it, when actually there are so many other ways they could still move forward in their situation without the other person's agreement. And as a consequence of feeling that way, feeling that kind of trapped feeling about the need for the other person to agree, it's meant that they've spoken to the person in very abusive ways, or very critical ways at least, or very belittling ways, or sarcastic ways, when actually they didn't ever need to depend on that other person's agreement in the first place. Now, obviously in some situations we might want to feel that we can agree with people over things or get to a place of agreement with each other. But if we can't, and we come to a belief that we need their agreement, and as I say, sometimes we could even see it as we need their approval of something that we want to do. When we can come to an acceptance that that may not be forthcoming from them, we can let go of the need to demonize that person anymore, because it happens or it doesn't. They agree or they don't. And we have no control over whether they will or they won't. That's got to be an agreement. By definition, is something that we both see, and want to be the same. And in some situations it might happen, but in many it doesn't. But it doesn't have to be a destructive experience as a consequence. It can be that we just come to terms with the fact that the other person sees things differently to us, and we can still move on. And it doesn't even mean that we have to fall out with them. I can remember some examples recently on a personal level where in the UK, some people might be watching from outside the UK, but in the UK there was the whole period where Brexit occurred, where the UK left the European Union. And people fell out very, very strongly over those issues. And I personally found that some people who really strongly expected me to have voted a particular way, when they found out that I didn't, effectively stopped speaking to me and stopped remaining in touch with me, which I kind of, as you can tell, I kind of find quite funny, because I thought, well, whatever meant that they thought that they knew me well enough to know which way I would vote, one way or the other. And some people genuinely got quite upset with me, and I've never really been in touch with them again. Other people I also know felt very strongly about the way they voted, and very, concerned about the situation. But we had conversations about it, and there was no personal difficulty whatsoever between us over the fact that we had different views. And it's interesting how that is possible, but not always what happens. And so to be able to have a conversation with people who you strongly disagree with without ever having to make it a personal criticism, a need to undermine them, a need to belittle them, a need to demonize them. Being able to have conversations with people without the need to do that can be an incredible opportunity, because it makes it more likely that we're going to learn from them why they see things that way. It makes it likely that we're going to be able to respect that they have a different view. It can be interesting for us. It can actually offer creative opportunities, because we both then, based on our different views of things, create ways forward for ourselves, rather than get stuck in a kind of a tug of war with each other where all our energy goes into that, instead of creating something new, creating a different way forward. And so what I'd encourage you to consider, and as I say, this is as much my own advice to myself, or my consideration to myself, is that if you feel you're in disagreement with someone, that actually it can be a creative opportunity, that it doesn't have to be that you have a war with the person. You may feel that they're at war with you, and they're saying unpleasant things to you because they disagree with you. But obviously you could respond in kind, but the opportunity is there to think, okay, this person doesn't see things the way I do. They're perhaps not being so kind towards me even so, or as a consequence of that. But I can still keep my focus on what it is I'm wanting and how I want to go forward, based on my perspective of things, how I see things. And my energy doesn't have to go into battling with this other person that I disagree with. And so agreement is not necessary. In fact, agreement is almost a ball and chain. It's almost a kind of a prison for us. The idea that we have to agree can become a prison for us sometimes, if we become dependent on the idea that that's what has to happen. It's great if it does. How fantastic, if it happens, it happens. But it's how we disagree which can be the most destructive thing that can arise from having a different view about things, a different view to another person or a whole group of people about things. It's how we disagree. Do we try to force them to see it our way and make them agree with us, which is kind of a contradiction in terms. You can't make someone agree with you. Or do we think, okay, they see things their way, I see things my way. Interesting that that's the case. What can I learn from that? How can I move forward even though we see things differently? And I really am talking about some of the most difficult experiences that we can have over situations, things like bullying, over things like different relationship difficulties within families, within workplaces, with neighbours, within communities, with friends. They're all opportunities for us to think, okay, this person sees things differently to me, but does that mean that I have to battle with them? Or does it mean that I can just think, okay, they have their view, I'm going to respect their view, I'm going to accept that they see their view, see things the way that they do. I might not like it, I might not even see how it's possible that they could see things how they do, but nevertheless they do. What can I now do for myself that means I can focus on doing what I want to do, that doesn't have any dependence on them changing their perspective and me not needing to feel I have to make them see things differently. And for me, in today's world where there's constantly a discussion about why is it we don't seem to be able to disagree respectfully. Why does it have to be, cancel culture? Why does it have to be demonization of people? Why does it have to be exclusion of people on the basis of their views? Why are people boycotted because they have a different view? And I'm also speaking of some of the most extreme views. For me, people having extreme views isn't going to change just by us not turning up to listen to them, or saying that no one must turn up to listen to them, and stopping people from listening to people's points of views. That doesn't stop those views from happening. If anything, it makes them more entrenched. So accepting that other people have different views, accepting that sometimes listening to those point of views can be useful for us so that we know how we want to move on, is a way of dealing with the fact that very often we just don't agree with people, and there's no need for us to have to agree with each other, and there's no need for us to have to try to force other people to agree with us. So there are my thoughts, as far as I am able to summarize them on the idea of agreement and disagreement, because it is something that I notice quite often in a lot of the disputes that I work with, is that people seem to think that the most important thing is the other person agrees with them, rather than that they are willing to acknowledge that the other person doesn't agree with them, and that the most constructive way forward is to accept that and to then focus on what they still want to do, even though the other person doesn't agree. Where can their energy be focused so that they're moving forward with what they want, rather than being obsessed with and feeling dependent on the need for the other person to agree with them. So please let me know your thoughts on disagreement and agreement. Please let me know if you've got challenges yourself with that kind of concept. Please let me know if you've got questions. Also, please let me know if you've got other topics you'd like me to talk about. I hope you found it interesting and useful. I certainly do, because it's the kind of thing that I see very often happening between people that I work with, and not just people I work with. But I hope you found it interesting and useful. As I said, please leave me any comments, and I hope to see you soon. Thanks very much for listening. Bye bye.